You're Bacon Bits and Bites podcast, and I'm your host, Karen Swizik. This is the podcast where a bit of business and a bite of technology come together. Every month, I interview entrepreneurs, investors, startup founders, and people in tech to learn about what drives them and what makes them tick. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bacon Bits and Bites podcast. And today with me, I am excited to have Paul Deng, the founder of the Passionfruit app. Their mission is to empower people to build deeply fulfilling lifelong connections with each other. And they do this by encouraging and teaching their users to practice empathy, patience for their journey to find friends. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks, Karen. Very glad to be here. How are you doing?
Good. I'm very excited to talk to you about Passionfruit. So before we dive into it, I read on the website that you came up with the idea of the social app while volunteering at the Toronto Distress Center. And what made you decide to become a volunteer there? And what was that experience like?
It's very interesting you ask. So I think I've always sort of been on the lookout for ways to, give back to the community. I'd done a couple other things before the distress center. So I had volunteered at a long-term care home. I'd done another stint as a high school tutor for underprivileged kids at this organization called Pathways to Education. And it was sort of random how I really started volunteering there. I was actually at this party. Not my friend, but a friend's friend was telling me about this. This is something that you can do. I don't know how exactly the conversation came up, but I think we were talking about how what I'm good at, and usually among my friends, I'm somebody that people confide in. I tend to have an empathetic ear. Maybe it's just a natural talent or affinity for that. And I think somehow the conversation came up, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't mind doing something like that for people as volunteering. Whenever I had spare time, and they would just call, and if I had time, I'd answer, and I try to help out or I lend my ear, basically. And he was saying, well, you can actually do that, and you can do it through your phone, and you don't even have to go anywhere. It's very convenient. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let me look into this. So he told me about it's very convenient. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Let me look into this. So he told me about the actual organization that did it. Actually, it wasn't as he described. You actually can't do it on your own smartphone or anything like that. You actually do have to. First of all, it's pretty rigorous training. It's like 3 months of training, and then you have to be at the call center. And in Toronto, I think there's about there's 3 different locations, and there's 2 volunteers staffing the hotlines at any given time, each location. So it's about 6 people in total, but you do have to be there, and you're hooked up into these proper I think there's Cisco phones or whatever, conference phones, so you can't do it from your own smartphone. I found that out. However, the caveat to that is that after volunteering there for quite some time, I think they saw that I was performing well enough that they sort of gave me added responsibilities. And one of those areas was this service that was especially tailored. I think it's generally known that the residency process can be pretty stressful. So that was a channel open up only to them. And for that, we did do our shifts hooked up with our own smartphones, and that we could do remotely at any time. So ironically, that came full circle down the road.
And did you find this experience kind of led you to creating Passionfruit?
I think it was a strong influence. I can't say it wasn't the only influence, but what I did notice volunteering there is that I would say a lot of the people calling in, it's hard to make generalizations, but it seemed like the sense that I got was that often it's hard to fix problems when they get really, really bad, or when when you keep taking blows one after another. That takes a toll on you.
Mm.
And I just got this feeling that sort of built up over time that it would be sensible and probably more effective if we started to try to tackle these issues that people have more proactively rather than reactively. And so yeah, I started to think about what are some ways we can do that when it becomes a reactive problem. Like, so we have a certain finite number of volunteers at any given time that are willing to lend a ear, and the reality is that I think it's not surprising you read about how mental health, anxiety, these things are becoming more and more of an issue. There's just not enough supply of volunteers to think it's not surprising you read about how mental health, anxiety, these things are becoming more and more of an issue. There's just not enough supply of volunteers to go through that. It was actually one of the things that was eye-opening to me was how many people were trying to get through. And we often had very long wait times in order to just get to the next person.
Oh, wow.
Before we wrapped up with the previous one. And at certain times I felt handicapped. So in a way, okay, it's an anonymous environment, and it's we're not really maintaining any long-term connections. Although some people we do, if they call over frequently, chances are that we might get in touch with them again, and so we actually do remember their stories. But a lot of times we don't remember the stories, so it's just these one-off calls a lot of the times, and there's a lack of intimacy because it's anonymous. So in that environment, it can be challenging to help people. So in that environment, it can be challenging to help people, especially when the supply of volunteers doesn't really match the demand for the services. We had training, we had strategies to sort of try to move things along. And I understand that because it's just the reality of it, but it felt like we were in some way constrained to really doing more. So that's one of the drawbacks with dealing with these things reactively, right? So I thought, okay, if we're going to come up with any kind of sustainable solution to try to alleviate or combat these things, we ought to empower people to do that collectively amongst themselves, as opposed to really just kind of deferring that responsibility to some higher authority. I think we have this tendency to, when it comes to mental health issues, it's very easy to sort of just hand wave it away and just kind of defer it to somebody else. So anytime somebody's struggling, it's very often that we just tell them, you should go get help, right?
Right.
From a professional or something like this. And really, I guess one way is therapy, but therapy is pretty expensive and it doesn't always work. Even with therapy, I still feel like, because I have some experience as well in the therapy space, for really serious issues, there's limits to what they can do there as well. And they would actually, even therapists would tell you, okay, if it's an emergency or something, call a hotline or something. And actually volunteering in the hotline and realizing what it's like, it sort of dawned on me that, we're not really well equipped to handle that much responsibility. It's like we tell people to go get help from somewhere, but oftentimes, that's not the ideal solution. It's actually woefully ill-equipped to deal with the gravity of the problems we face. So, the combination of all that, people just in general in their communities more proactively trying to get on top of these things before they become issues. Because another pattern that I noticed, which is not always true, it's very hard to make broad sweeping generalizations, but a lot of people, it felt like, were struggling because they lacked adequate support networks, right? We all have challenges in life, and there's ups and downs and so on. But I would argue that not having real strong, authentic support networks, people that are really in your corner through time, consistently, that makes these things probably something like 10 times harder. It just, you have to grapple with these things yourself. And a lot of times we get into these, tunnels where we're going through life where we're busy, if we don't have if we don't really maintain or nurture or cultivate those strong connections, we might notice later that something really important is missing, but it's a little bit late to sort of address those things.
Yeah, for sure. So with respect to the app itself, and I know there are many apps and services out there to find friends, to make connections. So a couple that come to mind are Shaper and
Mm-hmm.
BumbleBiz. So what are some of the pain points you discovered while doing your research?
Right. Yeah. So I'm quite an avid user of both Shaper and Bumble in all its various forms, like Bumble Dating, Bumble Biz, Bumble BFF. And I've talked to a considerable number of people also that have used these services extensively. I would say a big pain point for me is just that I have spent a lot of time on those platforms, but really much of the time, is it the people's fault? Is it the fault of the app itself because of the user experience that it entails? And I don't think there's any real easy answers to it. For example, on Bumble Business Shaper, a lot of the times you run into people who are really just trying to promote themselves or market something, whether it's some multi-level marketing scheme, or they're trying to get clients for their dental practice, or they're a real estate agent, or they're a lawyer. You know what I mean? They're there to get leads on a business level, and that can make it challenging. And the reason I say that is because, so yeah, okay, is it really their fault? I don't know. It's not 100%, because right, the way that the apps work, it's like, I mean, I think most of us are familiar with like Tinder and swiping, the whole swiping paradigm. There's not really very strong context. You don't really know the paradigm. There's not really very strong context. You don't really know that, offhand before you choose to engage with someone, right? You swipe right on them because, okay, why not? They look like a reasonable person. But it's not until you actually start to get into these interactions and you've already invested a lot of your energy, and then you realize, oh well, I mean, it was pretty much like for them it was free advertisement for their services. They're not really looking to get anything, like we were talking about with the mental health issues and people building support networks. That's not really what they had in mind. And I've tried to be engaged in these kinds of conversations, but it's really tough when you do not have mutual alignment from both parties. It's very hard for one side to really steer things in a way that works. You know what I mean? Like if I'm not looking to get a real estate agent, can I still make something out of this interaction? It actually, a real estate agent, can I still make something out of this interaction? It actually does feel very, very tough in most circumstances. So that's like a big pain point that I've noticed with what's existing out there. I don't know if you've used them much or what you feel about them.
Yeah, actually, I was gonna also share my experience, and the two I mentioned, Shaper and BumbleBiz. So with BumbleBiz, I've used it briefly, and I know BumbleBiz is different from Bumble in that Bumble is more for dating, but it's strange. I felt that as I was looking through people's profiles in BumbleBiz, I felt a lot of them looked like they should have been on the dating
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's
set. And it's
that's a,
like, I'm not here to look for a relationship. I'm here to potentially like make friends or
oh yeah.
maybe, find like-minded entrepreneurs.
You bring up a very interesting point. Like I think there's a term coined for this phenomenon, but one of the things that tends any leeway, there will always be a sizable contingent of the user base that tries to turn it into a dating thing.
Like not every app is meant for dating.
Do you know couch surfing, for example?
Yeah, would you consider that like a precursor to Airbnb?
I would. I would actually. Yeah, I think it was really neat. Yeah, it's unfortunate didn't really go further. But the reason I bring it up is because, so it's a really a good example actually. By and large, you wouldn't expect like a dating phenomenon to emerge out of couch surfing, but it did happen.
Oh, really?
Yeah, one of the key problems, because what would happen is that some people would use it purely as a way to romantic liaisons. It's the classic problem, like how much responsibility do you put on the users, and how much responsibility do you put on the app romantic liaisons. It's the classic problem. Like how much responsibility do you put on the users, and how much responsibility do you put on the app, the UI and the UX. So on Couchsurfing, as a host of a place or whatever, you're allowed to say that I'm only looking to host women or men, or men or males or females. So you can do that. But actually, what people ended up doing is some men only say that they're only comfortable hosting women.
Really?
Right, and they would use that as a way to, I guess, score dates from people that okay. This is sort of like this interesting side use case going on in the app. It tends to happen a lot in everywhere you see. I've even had people tell me about on LinkedIn that just some people just don't get the memo. I even see on my LinkedIn feed someone make posts like, by the way.
I've also read people's stories of people DMing them and like asking to start a relationship or go on a date, and it's really strange because for the most part, just given the layout of LinkedIn and what you see, it has that professional standpoint. So it's really interesting that people would think automatically, okay, it's a place where people connect online. That doesn't equate to dating app. So I just wanted to circle back to Shaper, the other app I mentioned having to swipe, and I've found mild success with that in that I've had Zoom calls with people and managed to stay connected with them and on LinkedIn. And I think what makes Shaper stand out a little bit better compared to BumbleBiz is that it connects to your LinkedIn profile and that you can state what your interests are and then what you're looking for. But what I found very interesting about your particular app, and you can dive into more detail, is the fact that you don't focus just are and then what you're looking for. But what I found very interesting about your particular app, and you can dive into more detail, is the fact that you don't focus on profile pictures and you don't have any photos.
That's right. So the reason for that now, this is also related to what we were just talking about. So the thing is, okay, I'm a guy. So on some level, I understand generally how our psychology works. And maybe that's what causes some of these issues. It's if you see a picture of somebody and you are attracted to people of the opposite sex, and it's a picture that you find attractive, a certain part of our neurochemistry, it just gets fired. I don't think it's anybody's fault. Nobody's really trying to be malicious, but I mean, that's just the way the brain works, right? The brain we don't evolve as fast as, tech evolves. Our biology hasn't really changed the part of our brain that gets fired. And, it does something. That information enters the equation, and it's very hard to just will it out of your, consciousness or even subconsciousness. And so that's why I thought we might stand a better chance if we just get rid of that part. Now, there's a trade-off there, right? Because we don't always use that information in a purely mate-seeking context. Like there is an aspect to seeing somebody's face, seeing their body language and all that helps with bonding. Mm-hmm. It does help to put us at ease and helps relating. I understand that, right? And so that's the kind of trade-off we have to make, I guess. And so, yeah, what I'm saying is I'm willing to go there and make that trade-off, because the other side of the equation, the fact that, we just can't, if we see somebody attractive and that just really colors everything, it's really tough to get beyond that. And I think that's why even with LinkedIn, even with Couchsurfing, with all these examples, you see people turn these into dating. It's very hard to police that kind of thing. And I just think that having a different take, it will allow for different types of interactions to blossom, because we take those parts, those nuggets of information out of the equation. And so what happens when you take that out? You have to fill that void with something else, right? And so we're trying to fill it with things that people are passionate about, and really stoke the fire of a conversation based on those let's say intangible things, let's say non-materialistic things. Really get people's brains working, thinking on those things, as opposed to And now doubling back to Shaper, I don't want to be way too critical, right? I have actually found a few people that, we had pretty good conversations on Shaper. I will say that even on Bumble Biz, actually, it's true. I did actually manage to have several good conversations through there as well. So success does happen. And I think you have to give them credit for that, because otherwise, nobody would be using these things. I think ultimately, there are successful use cases. There are examples of people that have had great introductions through Shaper, and I think if you go to their marketing portals, they'll tell you about some of the best examples of that. So we do have to give them credit for that. Really, what I would say is that I'm trying to make it less onerous to get to those points. You know what I mean? It's like if I sell you a product which 1 in 1,000 actions are going to be something like that, it's somewhat different from I tell you that, okay, well, we got something that hopefully it's 1 in 3, right? Hopefully we're not going to take too much of your time or make you feel really frustrated, because so some people might get lucky, but another user might not be able to go through 1,000 interactions. Another user might go through 200 and just give up because they've just been inundated with too much stuff that's low context and low quality.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Even though I do have Shaper on my phone, I'm not using it as much because I haven't had the ratio between successful interactions to, not so successful interactions. It's been less. And then a lot of times too, I've also found, again, and this can just be my experience, maybe I'm not using it enough compared to other people, that I'm the type of person, if there's a match, I initiate a conversation hey, I'd just love to chat. And I don't hear from them for
Oh yeah, I get that a lot.
6 months, which is fine. What's really interesting, again, just reiterating on the fact that you don't use photos, and this thought just came to me as we were talking about the various types of apps. I'm thinking, and this may also date me, but I remember back in the early days of the internet when it was dial-up internet and going on various chat boards, and nobody would want to use their photo because we were all afraid of being judged on how we look. So it was more based on our interactions. And then of course things such as MySpace came on, and then people were creating all their own sites where they could post photos, and we started to share more. So I don't know if you agree or disagree, but I almost feel as if with your app, we're kind of retraining ourselves, to think on a different level, or to interact on a different level, to take away the visual, even though, as humans, we are very visual beings.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point.
To interact on a different level, to take away the visual, even though, as humans, we are very visual beings.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point. I do remember those days as well. Because back in those days, IRC channels, things like that, there were different levels of expectations, right? The whole status quo, or the whole culture around communicating and relating online, it seemed different in those days. And I do want to point out that, so there are, we want to take the best out of both worlds. We don't want to lose what was good about those times. But obviously things progress, things change, and cool new things are available and possible now. And we do want to take the best of both worlds. I do want to point out there is this app. It's actually kind of making waves. So I try to keep on top of what other social apps are out there making waves. So there's this app called Dial-Up, and so the way it works is you tell the app, okay, here are some times that I'm available this week, and then at that time they'll give you a call. And then if you pick up that call, they'll match you up with some random stranger somewhere across the world, and then you'll just be connected, and then you'll just have a conversation. You won't even know each other's names. You'll have a online handle, and you'll be listening to each other's voice and just having a conversation with a total stranger. So yeah, there are things like that, and I've checked it out. I've used it. It's not too bad, actually. A lot of the conversations I have on there, 99% of them are very civil. They're very respectful, and so I've had some interesting experiences there, and I do see that kind of energy out there. So I think Passionfruit is something along those same dimensions. So we're trying to facilitate people to come together locally, whereas they do phone calls, so it's synchronous communication. You have to both be there, both be having your full attention. And we're saying, okay, we realize that, that can create some issues because we're also local. So you got to have, the sufficient density for that. So we're relaxing that. We're saying, okay, no, we're okay with texting and asynchronous communications, just to make it easier for people to stay in touch, because trying the dial-up service, it does demand a lot of your attention, and that can get exhausting. There are other players out there that do think in similar ways, and they're focused on these non-visual connections. I mean, the thing about pictures, I don't want to be a dictator about this, like I have to have it my way or anything. All I'm trying to say is that maybe that doesn't need to be the first thing that you see, you know what I mean? Like, right. There's nothing, like we have Instagram, we have, you see, you know what I mean? Like, right. There's nothing, like we have Instagram, we have all these things that you can share pictures with, but, is there something that caters to giving you a different first impression, right?
Right.
I'm not saying you can never know what the person you're talking to looks like, you know what I mean? You can even get that information very soon. It's just maybe not the very first thing, maybe not the very first impression. If you have some chemistry, if you want to get to know each other better, you can share your social media accounts with each other. I don't see any problem with that.
So I wanted to add on to the whole method of synchronous meeting versus asynchronous meeting, and it may have to do with the fact that I'm more of an introvert, and it's strange. Like it's the older I got, the more comfortable I became with the texting and the email versus the phone. And it's funny because, and my sister, it's almost feel like if somebody's calling me, as you mentioned, it does take up a lot of your time. You have to be active, present in the moment. Whereas if I receive a text, I receive email, I can't respond to it right now, or I need to think about it before I craft my response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely room for both styles of communication. Some people prefer one over the other. I mean, some people never do calls. Myself, I do calls, but most of my communication is the asynchronous variety. So everybody's got to find their own comfort zone in that. I think there's definitely value to be had in each mode. Well, the thing is, what I'll say about asynchronous is it does make it easier. I think that's like what we've noticed, like with texting, when it really took off, the amount of connections, the amount of conversations that people were having on their phones just exploded because it was just so easy to always keep in touch. Basically, you didn't have to be there. Always keep in touch. Basically, you didn't have to be there at the moment. You could see it half an hour later. You could still keep that conversation going. So we did see that it really helped with the abundance of communication. But one of the tricky things that we got to watch out for is that, like we were saying with using these apps like Shaper, they are prone to people getting distracted with other things and just basically forgetting that they actually have a conversation going. So you do see that a lot. I've read about this a lot. Like, this is, maybe you could even argue that it's becoming sort of like a pandemic in our social culture now, that the whole thing about ghosting people or not getting back to people. I would say it isn't, like you said before, like, it's okay. I would actually say, that I wouldn't like to think that that's okay. I mean, okay, I can live with it. But the thing is that, okay, I mean, okay, I can live with it. But the thing is that it's like the tragedy of the commons. It's like, okay, on a microscopic level, on a, on an individual basis, okay, I mean, whatever, it's not the end of the world. I'll live, right? But when you cultivate this kind of expectation or normalize it, and you have a whole community that practices it, it degrades the experience for everybody, right? And so imagine that I'm trying to commit my time, I'm trying to invest my energy to go and meet people, to enjoy new conversations with people. And this becomes a significant factor. And I know that this is a very real possibility. It's gonna, it's gonna put me off somewhat. And, everybody's gonna lower their expectations. And basically we are gonna extend the tide on this. it's going to be tricky. Like moderation is always tricky, but I do think it is quite important to not just condone this type of thing. I think that's one of the things that even the like the established tech companies are learning, is that moderation can have very real value, very real benefits. So I think in the web, the 1.0 paradigm, the existing players, most of them try to really just scale, like get as many users as possible, as fast as possible. So now we're sort of seeing the side effects of that with, I don't know, like you see with Twitter or with Facebook or whatever, with the latest controversies about, okay, should we actually go and police what people are saying, or should we let it just stand? It's like, okay, you've opened Pandora's box now, because you basically prioritize growth over everything else. It's an anything goes Wild West, and we're sort of seeing that might not be prioritize growth over everything else. It's an anything goes Wild West, and we're sort of seeing that might not be a long-term healthy approach. So yeah, it is tricky getting moderation right. We want to be open, we want to be inclusive, but we also want to sort of cultivate the right values, the right incentives to really build that community out in the right way. I think that's something that's been historically very neglected, and it's not a good place to be. And I think dating apps and these apps for meeting people, they're one of the primary culprits. Because if you go on a Reddit or whatever, and then you just try to get a canvas of the general opinion about interactions, a lot of it is quite negative, I feel like. And I feel like that's unfortunate, because, purportedly these are services where you're supposed to be talking to people and really enjoying that, right? The value is lost if you're trying to meet people and you don't find the process enjoyable.
All right. So regarding the Passionfruit app itself, you're only allowing each user to have one passion versus several passions. What is your reasoning behind this?
So that's a very interesting question. I'm glad you asked. And I actually thought long and hard about how many passions we actually should allow before deciding to settle on this decision. So there's a few reasons that I just made that call. But before going into them, I'll just say that from the perspective of a startup, now it might be our assumptions might be false. Our rationale, our hypotheses, the reasons that we've decided to go with one passion, that might be false. So there's leeway for us to change depending on the feedback we get, the insights that we get from our users, and we can make that decision. So I really wanted to just start this question from first principles, right? Like, what is the absolute minimum number of passions that you need to spark some connection, right? So I think we're just being completely reductionist and saying that one is the absolute minimum, right? If I have 0, then basically it becomes completely random. And so there's a few services out there that are completely random, and that has a different kind of experience. Like, I think a lot of people know about Omegle. There's things like Chat Roulette, even that app I think I mentioned last, Dial Up. So with complete randomness, it can be exhausting, right? You could go through a lot of people and you have no strong context with them. So I really asked the question, what is the absolute minimum that we need, and that hypothetically could work? And I think, yeah, so you go with 1 and you see, is that enough? And is that too much of a hindrance to people? And you see, is that enough? And is that too much of a hindrance? Do people really need to have more than 1? Okay, so it's something that we're actually very interested to test, to see if it actually works really well, right? So now let me go into the reasons why we think starting with 1 is a smart choice. So the first reason comes down to the user experience, right? So if you are, let's say, the type of person who you have one really strong passion that you can't stop talking about, right? And then it seems like everything else sort of just it's very tertiary for you. And if you were to be forced to be dragged into some conversations that aren't revolving around your one true core North Star type passion, you might get bored very quickly. You might lose interest. You're not going to have a lot to contribute. So if you're in that boat, then I think it really fits you to a T. It really fits you to a T to have that one passion, right? And like if we made the sign up process where we would force people to put more than one, even though they only had one, you might have to really stretch yourself thin to try to fill in those other gaps, right? So that's if fit the ideal case. So, but what if we didn't force people to put extra if they only have one? So there's an interesting problem that I've observed with some of the other social apps when it comes to this. There's this asymmetry dynamic going on. So what I mean by that is like, so let's say I'm on some kind of a dating app or a social app or something that makes me fill out a profile, and then a part of that lets me really flesh it out. I can really add all my interests, make my biography. So one of the things that I notice is that when you have, let's say, content, so if one person has a very, very brief profile and another person has like this huge essay, and then you just have these, there's sort of like you don't know what to expect as a user in the user experience. And it's like, it's not a level playing field, you know what I mean? So that creates a sort of weird dynamic. Now, the person who, they're very succinct with their profile, they may have a lot to offer. It's just that they don't want to invest their time into the window dressing, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So we really come from a place where we want it to be as easy as possible to get on Passionfruit. So the reason we use Facebook or your social media to really streamline authentication and registration is we don't want you to like spend ideally any time making a profile, because nobody likes to do work when it comes to you want to go out and enjoy meeting people and having fun, interesting conversations. So we want to like actually minimize the amount of time you can spend on that. And when it comes to like, okay, what do we need to ask? What are you passionate about? Like, so we don't want you to have to really stretch yourself thin, like really force yourself to think up all the things that make you who you are, and then use that to find you relevant matches. So we want it to be a very easy, painless, and enjoyable experience. So we don't want you to do the work. Now, when it comes to putting one passion, if you do have, so if you're a multi-passionate person, and there are people who are, there's an interesting part of this sign up process where you're not doing work per se. Like you're not like looking for your best photos. You're not trying really hard to think up the right words to put in an autobiography. There's not so much work, but there's a process of elimination which adds value. There's not so much work, but there's a process of elimination which adds value to that registration. So it's a very short registration, and you only have to tell us one thing you're passionate about. But in the process of having to reduce it down to the thing that you prioritize the most, you've sort of done some work, even though you're not really doing work per se. And that, I think, adds a lot of value. So anybody who sees you on the app and sees your profile, and they've seen what you've chosen as your foremost passion that you really want to talk about on this app, it shows something, it reveals something, right? Whereas if I saw like 10 different passions, I'm not really sure which one is really most important. I'm not even sure, like, is there a hierarchy to it? Are they all equally important? Are 8 of them really just things that you put, but I don't know, it wouldn't really go very far if we started to talk about them. So there would be more ambiguity. So we really want on ambiguity, because like I said, we really want to focus on quality connections over quantity. So if there isn't anything worth making an introduction, making a match for 2 people to start a conversation, we actually want to avoid needless conversations. So we just want to maximize the chance that when we bring 2 people together, that there is a very good reason to do so. So that's one reason, right? Another reason is, so we want it to be a fun sort of a segue into a conversation, right? So I think I mentioned before that that's one of the things I found lacking in some of the other apps, is that I didn't really know how to inject fun into our initial interaction. It was always challenging, like figuring out what we should talk about, right? I mean, should I break the ice by like say, hey, how's the weather? Like should I make small talk? Like sort of like this anchor or a beacon for a conversation. It's like so you have a natural sort of a talking points. Like, that's interesting. This person picked something. I don't know, something really weird. Like, I wonder why they chose that out of all the other things that they could have chosen. Maybe I'll ask them about that. Right? It's sort of something that hopefully helps people to break the ice and facilitates an easy way to connect with somebody when you're just strangers. And obviously, yeah, it's a very difficult point in any relationship for something to proceed smoothly. I understand that it's a really tricky point in any relationship that you're trying to build, right? And okay, so another thing is now we are saying you can only have one passion at a time, because I think that psychologically, I mean, I think this is just how human psychology works, is that we are terrible multitaskers, right? Go to show this. Like if you want to do something well, you can only really focus on one thing at a time. Like you can switch, right? You can do one
Right.
thing at one time, and then once you've gotten that to some state that you're satisfied with, then you can start doing something else. But at any given time, I think your focus is in something. It can't be in multiple things. If it is in multiple things, then you're probably equally distracted in all the things, right? So I think the key here is that you're not locked into your choice, right? So if this week you're really obsessed about one thing, that doesn't mean that you might actually lose your passion for it. You might actually find that your energy level for that has decreased come 2 weeks later. So your passion is a way for you to sort of, like, how social media gives you a feed to update like what's going on in your life. We're not doing social media, so you don't have a feed or anything like this. But the passion is sort of like a little bit of a, what are you thinking about at this point in your life, right? And what's really, really, really important to you right now. So for these reasons, I think it's something that it will be interesting, and I have actually have had a lot of people give me a range of different thoughts about how good of a decision it is to go with one passion. So I've gotten the gamut of in terms of people's opinions, but then there are some people who say that it's really limiting. I would really struggle to just reduce it down to one. But there are other people that really seem to resonate with that sheer focus. So it's interesting. I think it will be exciting to see how it's adopted, and we will continue to be attentive and listen to the community and ask them and observe how well it's working. Because sometimes the fact of the matter is what people say is different than how they act, right? Matter is what people say is different than how they act, right? Like I think the classic example of this is when Facebook first came out with the feed. So before the feed, there was just it was totally different, right? You had like your own wall. Everybody had a wall, and you just go to different people's walls and check what they, what they're up to. And then at one point, they came out with the feed, which we all now know is synonymous with social media and Facebook in particular. And there was a huge outcry. Right, a lot of users were very vocal about how this would, destroy their experience, and they hated it, and they were going to quit. They were going to delete Facebook and all this stuff. There's a huge uproar back then, from what I remember, and there's actually been articles that have written about it as well. But it actually increased engagement in Facebook. It actually, so the numbers showed that people were spending a lot more time on Facebook, and they were using it more and seemingly enjoying it more. So there is that aspect, using it more and seemingly enjoying it more. So there is that aspect of it where sometimes human psychology is multi-layered. It's tricky. We might not even understand ourselves sometimes what's best for us, or what we would enjoy the most, or what would give us the best results, right? So it will be interesting to see how well it works, and if it's something, in fact, that it's actually delivering really great results, and we want to keep it that way, or okay, we were wrong, and we actually need to give people more options, and we need to make some tweaks to that.
I think it's actually really interesting that you are deciding to focus on the one passion because, as someone who is multi passionate, I originally thought, well, that's not enough. I can't just have one. But when you were talking about how people have a lot of passions, but there also may be like a hierarchy to it, or they may be passionate about a certain thing,
Yeah.
in the next 2 weeks. And now that I'm thinking about my own passions, others, and there's actually one particular thing that I'm currently passionate about, that's like lighting a fire. So if I was to create my passion fruit profile, I'm like, okay, I'm going to put that specific thing. So yeah, that's very interesting. I think that'll help the app stand out. So I had another question regarding passions.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't have an exact match based on their passion, is there a
Mm.
possibility of being matched with things that are closely related that may have some overlap? So, to give an example, I was thinking if somebody is interested in manga, would they be matched with somebody who's interested in anime?
So actually, this is a very good question. Excellent question. I'm glad you touched on it. So the long term goal is actually to implement the best, tech, is things like machine learning, predictive algorithms that actually are able to intelligently group these things even without manual human intervention, right? I think that's a lofty goal, and for that we need a lot of data, we need a lot of users, we need a lot of traffic to really to be able to work something like an algorithmic solution, or a machine learning, deep learning solution into this. That's a very, very long term goal. But I do believe that so the way we're doing matching, there are passions that are quite adjacent, right? Even if they're not an exact match. And I do think it would be we would be serving our users well to actually bring people together, even if they were adjacent. So this is something that in the interim, I'll say, before we can actually implement like these really great algorithms to it, what we can do is we might have to do it more manually. So what we'll do is we'll be attentive. So we'll sort of have a heat map of the different passions that people are putting in the app, right? We'll be attentive. So we'll sort of have a heat map of the different passions that people are putting in the app, right? We can see that as the developers of the app. And what we can do is we can sort of run these live experiments where we kind of, yeah, like you said, we match people even though they don't really have the exact same thing, and then we can observe the results of that experiment, see if that's actually a good idea or not. Like we actually may make a decision and say, oh no, actually that was a terrible idea. These two types of passions should never be mixed. These people should be kept away from each other, right? We might find that, but we might also find the opposite, that okay, this was actually a great idea. Like we should keep doing this. So it's definitely something we're planning to be very attentive to as we build out this community. And yeah, that's for sort of things that might require some judgment calls. There are some other things which as we get more data, as we get more users, we might just actually realize that those two things were pretty much the same thing, even though they had a different name, right? There's like plenty of things like this, like language is imperfect. There's different cultures have different names for different things, right? So there are things that are really much similar enough that they pretty much can be considered the same umbrella of a passion. With your example of anime, so that might require a judgment call. Like there's just specific genres of anime, for example, but we'll see. Like so one thing was, if somebody loves manga, we might just basically connect them with everybody who loves anime, right? That might be a judgment call that makes sense to make. So we'll see. It will be interesting.
Mm-hmm. And based on your experience so far building Passionfruit, what advice would you give to someone who wants to build an app?
Oh boy. Oh wow, that was a this is a big one. So background, and they have an idea, concept for an app, and they have no background in it. So pretty much that's me, right? And so if they have no background in it, I think it's a completely different ball game versus somebody who's already kind of technically proficient. Maybe they're trained, they've worked many years in the industry, they have a computer science degree or something very similar. I think it really depends. Which one would you say that you're leaning more towards?
Yeah, that's actually a good follow-up question. So I would go with the former, because I believe a lot of people have great ideas and they want to build an app, but they don't have that technical expertise to do so.
Yeah. So okay, I don't know if I'm qualified to give advice. Like I can't say, because I'm still figuring things out myself. I don't know if I can give any definitive advice to somebody like how to do this and succeed, right? But I do think for a lot of non-technical founders, one of the key challenges is finding, and for that, I've actually made a lot of mistakes along the way. So I think perhaps I can just, tell about the some of the things I now consider were mistakes that I made, and help people to avoid making some of those same mistakes, right? So the first thing I will say is that now it's you should try to fail cheaply. What I mean by this is that,
That's a good one.
yeah, and this is not like, I'm not inventing this. Like, this is well documented. Like, the whole lean startup methodology is about failing cheaply, right? So, and I didn't really know about this, so I didn't do this. So, but I am telling anybody out there, if you can't build it yourself, so so the question is, who are you gonna get to build it, right? And a lot of people, they automatically gravitate towards outsourcing it, hiring some contractors, freelancers to do it. So with that approach, which is outsourcing it, hiring some contractors, freelancers to do it. So with that approach, which is something that I tried earlier on, it's it's tricky. Like, the thing is that I think you got to understand, you have a certain amount of emotional connection to your concept, to your idea. You really, really want it to succeed, right? Uh, and you're thinking about this in the shower, day and night, 24 hours. It's on your mind, right? If you so you have a very clear concept of what it is that you want to build. If you give this as a sort of a contract to somebody, the chances are there are going to be things that are going to be lost in translation, or that are not going to be covered in the scope document. And that's just, because, and how things should look, where things should be, how this should work. And you're going to try your best to really distill that down into a written, sort of a spec sheet. But I think realistically, some things are just going to be missed, right? Even if you're going to be super careful, there's always like reading between the lines. I think when it comes to doing any kind of work, there's a certain amount of interpretation involved. Okay. The thing about the contractor or the freelancer is, now this might not be universally true. Like, you might just, strike upon like a really great freelancer who always does absolutely goes above and beyond all the time. That might happen, but if you were going to ask me, I think the odds of that happening are quite low. So what I ran into is that, if you're paying people by the hour and they don't have really long-term emotional attachment to the project, like, so for them, it's going to be like, okay, I'm going to try to get this done ASAP, right? And really, as a bootstrap startup, you're also trying to save the cost. Like, you can't afford to pay people like six-figure salaries and have them on for 1 to 2 years to do this thing. You just want to get a prototype done ASAP, right? So the thing is, they want to get it done as fast as possible. So anything that's really open to interpretation, I think they're going to interpret it in the way that, okay, how can I do this thing as quickly as possible? I'm going to take shortcuts. It might not really be how you had in mind, right? And so you're prone to get into this sort of back and forth where things just aren't quite turning out the way that you thought they might when you gave out the specs. And so your costs can, add up pretty quickly. And then there's specs. And so your costs can, add up pretty quickly. And then there's also the, when it comes to building apps, right? If you don't have experience in the industry, you don't really know the sorts of things that can go wrong, right? You don't even know what kind of bugs can come up. And so, like, the question is, who is doing the testing, right? And testing is not cheap. To do rigorous, comprehensive testing, so you could give a spec sheet, and if you're working with somebody, they're just trying to, do a quick job, and then and then you're going and you're reviewing the work, you're testing the app, and it's just kind of not working well all the time. It's tricky because testing for established companies, that costs a lot of money, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated. So if the person you're working with doesn't have a rigorous attitude to testing their own work, and they're not methodical. Like they don't have that attention to detail their own work, and they're not methodical. Like they don't have that attention to detail. It can be really challenging to get a good result from that kind of arrangement when you're trying to outsource this technical work. And that it's not that surprising, because if they don't have that investment, that long-term investment, that emotional attachment to the product, if they don't see it as their baby, if it's not working that well and they're not that bothered with it emotionally, then these things can happen. And that's just been my some of my experiences with the challenges of trying to outsource it. And then things just the time frame just keeps moving, and then the costs start adding up. Yeah, so you can't underestimate the cost. Even if you have an idea that, okay, I have this amount of budget, you got to really think, how have you come to that estimate of the amount of the budget that you have for this, right? And even necessary to give you an estimate, how reliable is their estimate? Can you really trust that estimate, right? And along those lines, so you're also on this journey doing a lot of learning, right? As a founder, as an entrepreneur, you're going to be talking to potential users. You're going to be getting feedback. So it's sort of a moving target. Like I don't think you can have a fixed sort of a spec sheet of what you need. So for me also, I did a lot of learning along the way. So there were sort of tweaks that I said, okay, now this is actually a good idea. Then maybe a month later you think, okay, well, actually maybe that wasn't a good idea. And let's say that you are actually even launching a beta, or you're testing with users and they give you feedback. So you might be able to afford a very quick and dirty, like a first version of that prototype. But as you start to test with users and get feedback and really try to build a community of users, you're going to have ongoing costs, right? So you got to really figure out, is this even something I can afford before this business is generating revenue? And so this is not like I'm uncovering some big secret. I think if you go to Y Combinator, the startup school, there's videos that they talk about how outsourcing is kind of seen as generally a bad idea most of the time, because it's really going to be more expensive than you think, a lot more expensive, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what I'll say with regards to outsourcing. And so what are some other ways that you can try to solve this problem? So the classic way is to find a co-founder, right? So far, I haven't yet found a CTO. So that's one thing, by the way. I haven't actually found a real CTO that I can say, okay, this person's in charge of the tech, and anything building the app is tough to find a CTO. So why is it tough to find a CTO? Because it's not just the fact that you need somebody who has a skill set, right? They can do the work, they can code or whatever. And this is the mistake that I made earlier on when I had a CTO. So it just didn't work out. The fact is that I think they have to really share the values that you do. Mm-hmm. I think that the tough question is, like, you have to ask is what is their why, right? Like this is the sort of the classic question that when you're starting a company, you have the what it is that you're doing, you have the how, right? Like how it is that you're gonna go about and execute that plan, like that service, the product, whatever you're trying to do. But then there's also the why. Why are you doing it? Why are you invested in this, right? Doing it. Why are you invested in this, right? And that's the toughest question in my opinion, when it comes to building that team, getting co-founders. Because while you might be able to do it, like you can answer the how, right? They might know, they have the competency to do it. If you are not aligned in terms of the why, there's a pretty sizable chance that you're gonna come to odds over things, right? If they don't really share that vision that you had, or the vision could change, the mission could even change. But if you can't see eye to eye on why it is you're doing something, I think it's incredibly tough to have that working relationship. You have to have a common North Star. You have to have a common purpose that you're striving towards. And that's one thing that I didn't really understand, because this is my first startup that I tried to. I didn't focus on values. And in my opinion, I think that's why things didn't really work out, and I couldn't keep people motivated. Things sort of just got bogged down. So now, given where I am right now, what I will say is that if you can't get somebody like as a CTO, that doesn't mean that you can't make it happen. Okay. I think that a lot of times people assume that like that's a checkbox that you have to fill. And if I can't get this filled, then I can't move forward. Like I'm just gonna be stuck here spinning my wheels, keep looking for the CTO, right? Okay, I don't think that's true. So the reason I say that is because when it comes to building like a MVP or a prototype or something that you can, a first version of something that you can bring to market, a lot of the times you don't really need, something that you can bring to market. A lot of the times you don't really need, it's always nice to have a CTO, right?
Right.
It's always nice to have somebody really, really competent to look over things and make sure that nothing's ever going to break. But you could build something conceivably, a version 1 that, okay, this might start really breaking if we have like 10,000 or 50,000 users, but it might work reasonably well if we had like 500 users. You know what I mean? It might be good enough. Like it might be held together with duct tape, but it might just do the job for the early going. And I think that if you can manage that, you should still go ahead and do it. Because the thing is that even when it comes to getting like a CTO for the long term, it's going to be easier if the more momentum you build, the more results that you show, the easier your recruitment will become, right? And that goes for recruiting a co-founder, right? And that goes for recruiting co-founders. That goes, I think, obviously for getting investment, right? So investors they want to bet on surer things, right? They want to have less uncertainties on the table. So the more you're able to get going and achieve by yourself, I think easier down the road to get co-founders. So I don't think it's something that you should ever be in a position where you're saying, look, okay, I can't code and I don't have a CTO, so I can't move forward. Having said that, like I said, I don't recommend that you go pay some freelancer to do it. So I wouldn't recommend doing it that way. I'll tell you about the other way that I've found that so far worked for me. And maybe it won't work for you, but it has worked for me. So this is the sort of, let's say, the third way, okay? I didn't really have any coding background, but so the tricky part is like trying to figure out how much of your time you should, commit to learning coding when there's so many other things that you also have to learn to be a successful entrepreneur, right? And that one, I can't say there's any hard and fast rules. I think you'll really just try to have to, find out where the good balance is. So for me, I've been learning coding on my own. I don't think I haven't made that much progress. So there's parts of the app that I understand how they work, but I can't say that, I'm competent enough to take over the whole thing today.
Right.
So I've been doing that because, like I said, I have some work was done, and, with the previous contractors that I had, and even when I had my first CTO. So over time, I learned how to, figure out what's going on slowly, even though I don't really have a professional background. So actually, what I've actually found was that we started over, okay? And the people that I started over with are just some people that I found along the way who they're not really ready to commit full time to being like a CTO or anything like that. But I actually did find some good-hearted people that were able to give me some of their time. One or two of them, they've come and gone. So they've made a contribution, and then they moved on to other things. There's still a few people that I'm working with right now. They're all over the place. So we keep in touch remotely. So they're making contributions. and I'm very, very grateful for that and for being able to find such people to help me. And so, I'm also relying on them, doing my part. And the biggest irony about this thing is, so the app is actually very, very close to something we can actually put in the app stores. So we're very, very close. And the irony about all this is that I've gotten so much more done. So we actually started. We decided after reviewing the code that came before, when I had the other approach with the actual CTO, that we decided that it would be better to start over. And the irony is that I've actually had a lot more progress working with people that I think they on some level share my values, even if they're not really ready to commit to a full-time role. But really without any expectations beyond that. So it's funny, like it's not something I would have ever expected starting out. And that's why the first thing I tried was to get that full-fledged CTO. It taught me that sometimes you can't always have it your way. Things don't always proceed according to a cookie cutter formula. But I think you have to stay committed to the course, try to be as adaptable as possible, and take solutions wherever they're coming from.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. So where can people learn more about Passionfruit and stay in the loop about the launch?
So passionfruit.me, that's the landing site that we have and we've had for a long time. I will caution that it hasn't been updated for a long time. So some of the information, especially in the team page, may not be up to date. Actually, the guy on the team page that you could see who designed and built the website is James. I'm still in touch with James. We're good friends. But I haven't focused on the website and updating those things because I've got my hands full with just trying to get the product. But I haven't focused on the website and updating those things because I've got my hands full with just trying to get the product shipped. So, but you can check it out on passionfruit.me. You can put your email in the mailing list. We've got, I think, over 200 people on the mailing list now. I've never spammed anybody yet. I haven't sent out any emails. But when we have important news to share, we will definitely be sending out the emails that the app is ready to be installed, and we'd appreciate your support. So, and also from the landing site, you can see we have the standard social media links, so you can follow us on all the standard social media platforms, and we'll also be making the announcements on those platforms when there's important news to share. And as well, if you go to I think the team page, you'll see my LinkedIn profile. So if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn, I also do post the things now and then on LinkedIn. So those are all ways on LinkedIn. So those are all ways to stay updated about the app. Let me see, am I forgetting anything? No, I think that's probably the best way to keep in touch about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your passion on making meaningful connections by creating the Passionfruit app. I can't wait for your launch to take place.
Well, thanks, Karen. I really enjoyed going over this, and I'm looking forward to watching more of your podcasts.
Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in, and stay tuned for more episodes. Ciao for now. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I would love it if you could subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, and share this podcast with your family and friends. You can follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Bacon Bits and Bytes. That's Bytes with a Y. And on Twitter, it's baconbits_bytes. Ciao for now.